So, in today's video we have something kind of important to talk about, technology, but specifically the ramifications of using certain technology, in this case social media, and we're going to be talking about that right now on Linux Lounge. Roll the intro. Indeed, as I said, we're talking about social media in this video, but specifically we're talking about why people join, how it traps you, and what the potential ramifications of using it can be. To start off with, let's answer two questions in one answer. Why people join social media and how it traps them. Well, most people join social media for a sense of community and to quote-unquote keep up with what people are doing. Which I suppose is a fair reason to join, because who wants to miss out after all? And if you don't understand the ramifications of joining in the first place, what could the harm be? But I'm here to say, as a sort of side note, what happens on social media does not matter. What people post is usually fairly superficial, I'm sorry to say. People will tell you what's important. Well, they'll tell it to your face, like they have for centuries, I suppose. But that's just kind of a side note. Keeping up with what's going on is a great trap to get people into social media. And it's a good way to keep people there too, as we're about to move on to. But realistically, there are three things that keep people on social media: addiction, a fear of missing out, and frankly these days, necessity. To cover the first point, I have to make a statement that I think most people will agree with. Social media is very addictive, and that's not because it's in any way good or beneficial. It doesn't even really feel good to use social media. It just kind of becomes this constant state when you feel okay when browsing social media and, being plugged into social media. And when you kind of post something, you get a sort of dopamine hit when someone likes or comments on your post. And, when you get to that point, it's dangerous. And I'm here to say, you don't need that. Real life has ways to make you feel okay and get dopamine hits. For our next point, we have a sort of fear of missing out, which ties into addiction. A fear of missing out, as anyone who has ever tried to leave social media will tell you, when you try to leave, that's just going to be something that happens, which, to be fair, isn't something to be discredited, as it may actually be a legitimate fear to have, which is something we will touch on later. But as I was saying, this fear quickly turns into a compulsion to just quickly check social media for whatever thing that seems important, and so the cycle continues. But once again, I can say that for probably 75% of people, the stuff that you're going to be missing out on by not using social media is totally superficial nonsense that you just kind of don't need in your life. So really, just don't worry about missing out, it's fine. And the last point I have is sort of a combination between a reason why people stay on social media, but also a way that it can trap you. And that point is dependency. You see, what happens when you start using social media and kind of sign up to lots of different social media sites is very quickly it becomes your only way to contact people. And it's not great to be forced to use a social media site that will exploit you to contact people. And oftentimes these people will actually be people that you have to contact. And let me clarify, that's not an excuse for having social media. If someone is important, they will find a way to contact you. But of course, at the time, it seems impossible to make them use another service because they're drinking all the social media Kool-Aid and they don't see the reason to join a service that won't exploit them in order to stay in contact with you. But once again, I guarantee you that if someone is really important, they'll join a site that won't exploit them or you in order to stay in contact with you. Of course, the issue is if you have to use social media professionally or because you're in a group that only posts privately to Facebook for important updates, well, in that case, that is a serious problem. And now we've gone over the reasons why people stay with social media, you might ask yourself, well, that's all well and good. Social media has me well and truly trapped, but what is the problem? Well, realistically, all the technology you use will have consequences. It just happens that social media is particularly nefarious and damaging to your life and person. For example, one of the potential consequences of using social media is, like I said earlier, dependence. And that dependence leaves social media companies in a very good place to exploit you, especially given the fact that you can't leave. Now, one of the most well-known ways social media can exploit you is through privacy invasions. But what a lot of people don't consider is that a lot of these invasions of privacy are actually totally self-inflicted. But more on that later. What most people acknowledge is that social media companies are collecting your data and selling it on to marketing companies. That's how they stay in business, which is not okay at all. But you might say, well, I don't have anything to hide, so who cares? Well, maybe you don't, but would you give a total stranger a log of where you've been and what you've been doing and for how long? How about giving a total stranger access to your diary or journal? I wouldn't think you'd want to. Yet people are happy to post this on social media, and there have in fact been studies where total strangers request people's information for a price at random in public, and people refuse to give it away. So why is it okay for social media companies? But of course, the other side of this is self-inflicted privacy invasions. Consider this. Some people post their whole lives on Facebook. Are you really comfortable with everyone that has access to your social media page seeing that? Which, by the way, might well be everyone if your account isn't set to private. Think about it. Where you've been, where you're going, what you're doing, pictures of you, pictures of your family even, pictures of people who don't even want anything to do with social media. And I've even seen people post pictures of their kids. Do you really want anyone to be able to see that? Now, as for the next consequence of using social media, it's maybe one that people don't think about nearly as much, but it's a huge consequence nonetheless. And it's the effect that social media has on you as a person. Now, one of these effects is that social media inherently will make you more narcissistic. It's just kind of how it is, which may at first seem like a heavy and insulting accusation to make. But think about it. A site that encourages you to post every detail about your life and rewards you with a dopamine hit for doing so will naturally encourage that sort of behaviour. Another potential consequence is that social media will shorten your attention span, which is also a given. Social media by design hooks you by giving you short dopamine hits for little effort. And that's just kind of why it's so addictive. And it's very effective for the site owners keeping you there and making money off you. However, for you, the end user, it's frankly devastating. Why go out and put lots of effort into something or engage with people in real life when you can just post something on social media and get a huge dopamine hit for less effort and get simulated social interaction while you're at it? Which, by the way, social media is not real social interaction, I might add. It's nowhere near as rewarding. But back onto the point, it's another example of how social media enforces and kind of encourages behaviour like this. Now, for the final consequence of social media to you as a person, we have to go into slightly dark territory. Social media inherently encourages people to post an idealised version of their lives. So therefore, it is reasonable to you that you will just kind of assume that people's lives are exactly as they are, as they're posted to social media, when this really isn't the case at all. But of course, the inevitable consequence of seeing everyone's perfect lives is to compare yourself to that. And that's just kind of human nature, and oh boy, nobody who has ever lived can compare to an idealised image that some people post to social media. And of course, an inevitable consequence is that people will believe that their lives are kind of, not as interesting as their peers. Which, as I say, is not the case, but is it any wonder that young people, the biggest users of social media, are so depressed? Now, of course, I'm by no means saying that all social media users are depressed narcissists, but I find it very real hazard. And, realistically, it's impossible to use social media without having any negative repercussions at all. I don't know. I think at the end of the video, the ideal takeaway from this is that, maybe it's slightly extreme advice, but in an ideal world, you would go out and delete all of your social media. You don't need it. It does more harm than good, but I realise for most people that's not possible. So maybe just be mindful of the negative effects that social media can have and limit your exposure to it.